Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's plenary on What You Do Matters, Leadership in Planetary Health at a Time of Tipping Points. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Gail Galetta, and afterwards she will present Courtney Howard, our plenary speaker. Dr. Gail Galetta is a professor of emergency medicine at the University of Massachusetts. She is the immediate past chair of the IFEM's Gender-Specific Issues Special Interest Group and was the lead author of IFEM's white paper on gender equity and diversity. Dr. Galetta is passionate about decreasing healthcare's harm on the environment and is a founding member of IFEM's Public and Environmental Health Special Interest Group. She was the lead author of IFEM's white paper on climate change and ecological crisis. Dr. Galetta also helped establish emergency medicine in Norway. She's quite the endurance athlete and the mother of 3 young children. Dr. Galetta.
Thank you so much, Paul. Just one correction. I'm not the mother of 3 young children, 3 young adults, 20, 21, and 22. Thank you. And I have the distinct honor to welcome you to the final plenary session and to introduce someone who may not need any introduction, Dr. Courtney Howard. So Dr. Courtney Howard is an emergency physician in Yellowknives Dene Territory in the Canadian subarctic, a clinical associate professor at the University of Calgary, and the president of Northwest Territories Medical Association. The chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance, Dr. Howard has researched menstrual cups and the health impacts of wildfires and was the first woman president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. She has led policy and advocacy work regarding adapting health systems to climate-amplified wildfires, social tipping points in the health sector, eco-anxiety, vaccine equity, active transport, plant-rich diets, fossil fuel divestment, carbon pricing, coal power phase-out, hydraulic fracturing, and with regards to Canada's oil sands. In 2018, International Policy Director for the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change and longtime policy brief author for Canada, she is on the editorial advisory boards of the Lancet Planetary Health and Journal of Climate Change and Health. She recently completed a Master of Public Policy degree at Oxford University, where she focused on using a planetary health lens to explore transitions to an economy centered around well-being, and is currently writing a book on that topic. She has 2 young daughters and loves to dance. Courtney.
Thank you, and my 11-year-old picked my shoes, so I wasn't allowed to opt out for flats. So if I trip, I know there's a lot of emerge docs here, and I'm expecting your best work. I know you're tired, but it could be my ankle, it could be my head. So thank you so much for staying right through to the end. And I know that this is a bit of it's an academic and sometimes somewhat alcoholic marathon that we run here. And I hope that it has just been a wonderful time for you to reconnect. I'm just going to, my presenter slide was not showing the same thing as behind me. So I trained here at McGill, and I spent a lot of that year walking and running up and down over Mount Royal. And it was an incredible year. It was a challenging year. I felt like when I was done, I finally understood emergency medicine. And right after, I went to do a locum in Inuvik, which is north of the Arctic Circle, and I didn't have a book. It was the middle of the winter, and that is a terrible thing to go to Inuvik in the middle of the winter without a book. So I picked one up in the Edmonton airport, and I had almost no time before my flight. So I essentially ran, sweating in my parka, looked at the airport stall, and picked the first one I saw, and it was about climate change. I thought, okay, well, now that I'm kind of knowing what I'm doing as an emerge doc, I should learn other adult things. So I started learning other adult things, and this one was around climate change. I read it on my way up, and by the time I got to Inuvik, I was really alarmed, because I hadn't learned anything about climate change, but we did learn how to read graphs, and I could tell that these graphs were not good. The internet at the time was terrible in the residence there, so on my first emerge shift, I showed up for the day shift, and it was quiet, so I did a lit review for the first time. And I pulled up the Lancet Commission's first report on climate change and health. This was 2009. I was in an emergency room that sits actually on permafrost. That's where Iduvik Emerge sits. And I thought, climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century? That was its tagline. I thought the only thing I knew was emergencies. You mean they missed the biggest one? And I was so mad that I said to every single person I saw for the next, I get really excited about things, I talk about them a lot. I was like, did you know climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century? And they were like, no, but my cousin is starting to go through the ice on the way to the trap line. It's really becoming unstable, and it's making it tough for us to hunt and to fish. So there were already up there food security challenges, mental health challenges, cultural sharing practice challenges. That part of the world is already 3 degrees Celsius warmer than when an 80-year-old elder was born. It's warming at about quadruple the global rate. So I started going around, showing up at places like this and saying, do you know climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century? And people started doing things like ducking into the bathroom when they saw me coming and abruptly requiring dessert at the table. And it was super lonely. And you'll find that any kind of change making you do, no matter what it is a bit lonely. And that's why I love this quote by Maya Angelou. She said that when she used to go on a stage or to direct a movie, she would bring everyone who was ever kind with her. Everyone who'd ever been kind to her, who had taught her, who had helped her live a better life, had been a rainbow in her life. And she tried to use that energy to become a rainbow in other people's lives. And I wanted to mention that here because I'm sure many of you have reconnected with people who've really meant a lot to you in your life. Andrew McPherson was here. He wrote one of my reference letters for Emerge. Judy was my senior resident at Chalk Trauma in Baltimore. These are people we've had long-term relationships with. And not only do they contribute to our lives, but essentially the more unstable the world gets, the more those links of trust and relationship go from being invaluable to priceless. They put us outside the tech bros algorithms. So I want you to know that the relationships you've built and strengthened this week are exactly what is going to help you solve the climate emergency, are exactly what is going to help you solve all of the problems you're actually seeing on the ground. So my disclosures, I wouldn't advise going into climate change and health if you're looking for a lot of money. It's really hard to get paid. I do get speakers honoraria from various academic institutions. I was a paid board member for the Canadian Medical Association, and I have had consulting money in the last couple of years from Health Canada and the Trottier Foundation. So what I realized sitting there in a hospital above permafrost, unstable permafrost, was that everything depends on our ecological foundation. Prior to that, I had seen environmentalism as something that existed lateral to what I did. What I now realize, it underpins every single thing that we do. We require a stable ecological foundation in order to function. That is what supports our social and structural, our economic systems, our social systems that then allow us to build, staff, and supply the incredibly complex structures where we go to work every day. And I am so proud of the work I still do at the bedside, but I do it knowing that contributes, healthcare contributes about 20% of overall health status. And meanwhile, we don't get to have healthcare if those foundations are unstable. And of course, the more unstable our ecological foundations get, the more unstable our societies get. And there are real problems with regards to this. So, when I was on the Canadian Medical Association board, there was an orthopod, and he was like, well, why should I do this? I'm not a environmentalist. I was like, well, do you want to show up in the operating room at 7 o'clock on Tuesday with the staff you need and the lights on and all the tools you need to be an operating person? If you do, you need to depend. We work in some of the most complex structures. There's almost nobody who requires a higher degree of societal organization to do their job than us. So this is an utterly key part of our ability to continue to perform emergency medicine through the rest of the century. This is where I go to work. It's the Stanton Territorial Emerge. We serve 20% of the Canadian landmass, about 30 Indigenous communities. We have a 1,000-kilometer trajectory to get to our trauma center, so it's an air ambulance outflow. In 2014, we had what we called at that point the summer of smoke. We had about 2.5 months of smoke. When we looked at our emerge visits for asthma, we saw a full doubling and a 50% increase in pneumonia. And when we asked people what it felt like to live in that smoke, they said, we felt disconnected from the land, we felt lonely, and I was worried about what it meant for my kids. One of the other messages that was really, really key and clear was that the people who prepared the most felt the best. So the people who said, okay, well, I organized in my community, we put the boats next to the river, we had an alternative means of escape if the fire blocked the highway. They looked proud, they looked empowered. You could tell that it had given a sense of purpose that gave them pride through that summer. And that is a message I want you to take from this. Preparation not only does good, but it feels good. And that's increasingly what the eco-anxiety literature shows us. So, fast forward, I bugged enough people over enough years that I finally got a keynote spot at the Canadian Medical Association Health Summit. I had just come back from Oxford. I landed as a state of emergency was declared in Yellowknife. So I'm standing there on stage like this as my hospital is being emergently evacuated all 1,000 kilometers down to BC. That had never been our plan. We had a shelter-in-place plan, an official shelter-in-place. We were supposed to evacuate to the gym at the local elementary school if there was ever an evacuation due to local fire. So you can imagine my colleagues, Territorial Medical Director Claudia Kraft, my good friend Katie Kessler, they had to figure out how to do this on about 3 days' notice. So this involved a military evacuation plane, getting all of our patients into the big hangar at the airport. You can imagine this is a stressful situation. We had a command and control model without ever having discussed this with our staff. I'm now the president of the Northwest Territories Medical Association, and I can tell you that the fallout from something like this is huge in terms of workforce health, in terms of relationships. And so now, honestly, I do this because I don't want anyone else's neighbor, Claudia Kraft is also my neighbor, to have to evacuate a hospital on 2 days' notice. It is just not fair. I know you think it's not going to happen to you, but increasingly it's happening to people around the world. We need to own this problem. So as our ecological foundation gets more unstable, around the world we're seeing additional health threats. So heat-related illness, heat is the #1 most deadly thing. Evacuation, trauma, anxiety, PTSD from a variety of hazards. Asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease increasing, all sorts of different infections which are increasing from Vibrio cholera to dengue to malaria, changing distribution. As different animals have their habitats change, they move into different areas. And so now all of a sudden you have a new set of animals, vectors, and humans that can cross over and lead to infectious disease. So this is driving the potential increase for other types of pandemics as well. All of this, of course, weird weather makes it tough to grow crops reliably. We're seeing decrease in staple crops worldwide with growing potential for multi-breadbasket failure, which is a potential badness that could lead to a massive global food price spike and huge rates of malnutrition. All of this, of course, has the potential to increase conflict and migration. Now, that's about all we're going to say about the badnesses, because you can read about this in any journal. Badnesses are very, very easy to find. What we want to focus on are the solutions. And as we do this, we need to keep in mind our social and structural determinants of health, because this has to do with threats to housing, threats to employment, education and training disruption, supply chain disruption, as well as destabilized government. And as we see backsliding of democracies around the world, we can see how a destabilized population, for a combination of ecological and social reasons, it becomes vulnerable to fascist messages. Okay, so it's very, very important that we at this moment exert real leadership. I believe the best message is long-term well-being for all, starting with well-being at the personal level, moving into organizations built to support well-being, and country states built around long-term well-being for all instead of GDP, because if you look in the literature, it really doesn't make any sense. So that is the sort of global plan, we're going to focus more in on what we can do as a health sector. But you can see that this has implications for every single thing that we do. I've got just some buzzwords going up the side there. So misinformation, aging and dignity, different models of healthcare, scaling up team-based care. There isn't a single thing that has been talked about at this conference that actually would not benefit from a climate lens. If we don't put a climate lens on what we're doing, we're just gonna make the wrong investments. We're gonna build the wrong teams. So please, get briefed as fast as you can, because you sit at a lot of tables and we need you to be doing that in a climate-informed manner. Unfortunately, the curriculum change has been slow, not only in medicine, but in economics, in engineering. You can't count on sitting down at any table you're part of with other disciplines who know what they're doing. It's a sad thing. A lot of it has to do with fossil fuel generated misinformation. So you may very well need to be the person who knows the climate stuff, who knows the temperature and precipitation projections, who knows where the clean energy revolution is going, so you can bring that up in your discussions. So it turns out we walk around in a complex self-regulating system every day, and this is what we've been trained to resuscitate. And you know, sometimes we do a great job. I spent 6 months on a pediatric malnutrition project in Djibouti. We saved many small children. We also were too late, too many times. And I know that anyone who's been in emergency medicine for a while knows both the utter heart-wrenching stomach pit feeling of being too slow and the incredible, hopeful feeling of efficacy of being fast enough to pull an unstable biologic system back into stability. That is what we now need to do with the Earth. So this is the complex self-regulating system that we walk around on every day. What are its organ systems? I think of the planetary boundaries as being the organ systems of planet Earth. So this is a planetary boundaries framework. I would encourage you to adopt it. It's by Johan Lockstrom. It's probably the major international framework. I think of these as almost the sticks in the planetary health nest that provide it with stability. So these include climate change, it's only one of them. Novel entities, all of these chemicals we put out into the environment without testing. That's not good. We did not use the precautionary principle with regards to chemicals, and unfortunately we're seeing a lot of under-tested but emerging problems from things like microplastics and others. Stratospheric ozone depletion is something that actually is working. We see that when we can solve collective action problems, as we have with ozone, by working together as a global community. Pollution, ocean acidification, many things to do with farming, fresh water change, biogeochemical airflows of nitrogen and phosphorus, land system change, and forestry, biosphere integrity, how many of these other living beings we manage to keep alive. These are all part of the web that we need to keep us healthy and to support health systems. Now, when you think about those as being the organ systems of the Earth, lots of different things we need doing. What are the critical things we need doing? Climate change is probably still the most acute thing we need to work on. We do not want this Earth to get to that place where it starts to spiral into instability out of our control. And unfortunately, we're getting kind of close. So on the one hand, we're approaching tipping points in the Earth system, but we're also approaching positive tipping points that can save it. So those are in clean energy, and I believe an incredibly important one is what we can do in the health sector. So this is a terrifying paper. Don't read it by yourself in the dark in the winter like I did. But essentially, people are worried that we can go through these tipping points and end up in what is called the hothouse Earth scenario. It sort of explains itself. You don't want to know more about it. But we think that we start to risk that at around 1.5 degrees Celsius of global surface temperature warming. Turns out the Earth is a little more sensitive, or a lot more sensitive, to getting hotter than we thought it was even a few years ago. So although the official target for the Paris Agreement was to try to keep global surface temperature warming below 2 degrees Celsius, aiming for 1.5, we now understand that really we need to try to keep it below 1.5. Unfortunately, we're pretty darn close to 1.5 already. And so the red line there is where we can expect to go with implemented policies, so the things that people have already done. And unfortunately, that's going to take us to about 3.2 degrees, which is not a place I want to go to. I was at a Chatham House Rules roundtable convened by The Economist magazine at the last climate change negotiation with health system adaptations from experts from around the world, and their question was, can we adapt health systems to where we're currently going, which is 3.2 degrees Celsius? We went around the table, not a single person thought we could. Okay? So where we're going right now from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint is a recipe for essentially a gradual decrease in societal complexity that will make it very, very difficult for us to do what we do. So we do need to adapt. That is we already evacuated my hospital. We have an adaptation sprint, but we also need to do the mitigation sprint. And when we think about the time windows that motivate us as emergency physicians, the mitigation sprint is an incredibly short time window, and we need to act immediately / yesterday. These are some of the places where we risk a tipping point at different levels of warming, but some of them starting at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we just had our first year over 1.5 degrees Celsius, okay? So climate scientists are starting to get real worried. There's crying in the climate scientist community, okay? And I know this is stressful, but I think there's actually so much beauty in starting to absorb this into your way of thinking. So I didn't realize that for most of my life I had an egocentric approach to the world. I unconsciously, and this is based on all sorts of societal stories that we have, assumed the humans were kind of in charge of things. I live now in a majority indigenous part of the world that very much sees all living beings as being our relations. So that takes a look at, when elders give a prayer, they say the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, the winged ones, the ones in the water, even trees. Dene National Chief Bill Erasmus told me at one point that in his language, lake is a verb. It's to lake. And he looked at me and he's like, English is such a bland language. But you can see, when we attribute a thou to that which we currently regard as non-sentient, not as almost as objects, things start to change. And what I love about this is it shows us that everything we do, you don't have to have the most positional power in the world to have an impact. You just have to have relationships with other living beings, and we all have those as we established at the beginning. So it's normal to feel super scared looking at this, and grieving is actually one of the things most people need to do when they come to terms with this. And grieving sucks. Put up your hand if you love grieving. Yeah, I would opt out of grieving any day. However, the good thing about doing the work of grief, as you'll know from other grieving you've done, is that once you pass through that maelstrom of emotions, you can see the same situation far more clearly. So now I've done a lot of grieving when it comes to this, but when a new report happens, I can read it with the same part of my brain active as if I read another type of emergency medicine literature, and I can adopt it into my practice. I'm not avoiding it. I'm not trying to we got to stop doing that, guys. We're not going to win, okay? So maybe put a bit of grieving on your to-do list. Allocate some time to it. Whatever works for you, journaling, walking through the woods, whatever, I promise you it's worth doing. And in fact, that's now part of what I believe to be the most useful framework for dealing with eco-anxiety. So 3 parts to it: grieving, keeping your bucket full on a daily basis, and finding your path to anxiety. You cannot yoga breathe your way out of a real emergency, okay? Bucket fillers. We have a hustle lifestyle that leads us into burnout. Environmentalists have the same thing. So what do you think happens to climate change environmentalist academic and merge docs? It's whoa, I burned out twice. Don't do that. It's bad. Your work goes downhill, okay? You're no longer creative. You're cranky in community. You don't have good ideas. No one wants to be around you because you're a terrible company no matter where you go. So you really do need to take the time to fill up your bucket, okay? Sense of purpose really can fuel a lot of this work. Sleep, exercise, time with your kids. Don't not be with your children while you're little because you're so busy saving the world for them for when they're big. I didn't quite make that mistake, but I came close. And I know that many of you have small children and this worries you very much. Take the time to hug those little humans and admire their little chubby elbows because they go away way too fast. Dance has always been my best way of dealing with grief. So this is a project.
We must move rapidly to a low-carbon economy, even before I die. Some people find this uncomfortable to hear. How do you feel about it?
In the days that move a little faster than light, and I see that the feeling is right. Gotta tell what I feel in my heart. And I love you, wake a little more every day. What the leaves, they blow and decay. While I grow a little farther from you. Well, I see your path, see your light. Need a little push to it right. Gotta feel the pain to push on through.
So that music was by Dene singer Jay Gilday, who's from Yellowknife. That took a whole community to put together. It took, you saw the dance teacher, you saw a couple CBC radio hosts, you saw a bunch of doctors, you saw some teachers, and really it's I can tell you, trying to do that in the middle of the winter with a drone, that requires a babysitter even, and all sorts of permissions. All those things that help you do any kind of a project like that are exactly what you need to be able to have a productive response to climate change. So making a plan. This is really how we alleviate anxiety. I was actually asked by the people who started SMAC, Roger Harris and Oliver Flower, to say, okay, so what if all of us in healthcare move together? What's our maximum impact? So I convened a global community to take a look at, so what happens if we together move from a egocentric model, which implies power over, you need structural power to get things done, to an ecocentric model, which implies power with. And why should we think we are any good at this? Well, people trust us. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, we're almost always at the top of the trustedness spectrum. When people trust you, they listen to what you have to say, and they're a lot more likely to sort of accept a potential change that you suggest. So this is a huge thing we've got in our pocket. And of course, people also trust humans who have values that they share. So we care a lot. We spend our lives trying to save the people that people love the most, their children. And when you look at messaging studies across the world, love for the next generation is the #1 reason why people take action on climate change, working from love. And it's scary to take a look at these models because Canada is warming at double the global rate. We need to anticipate continued warming through the lives of our children at least until mid-century, and that's if we manage to decrease. We're not at a new normal. The media often asks me if we're at a new normal. Nope, totally not. Like, take a look at the graphs. It's definitely gonna get worse before it gets better. So we have an adaptation sprint. We are underinvesting in our national adaptation strategy by a couple of orders of magnitude. We need to stop that, and that is actually the situation globally. This is a place where the global north needs to demonstrate real allyship in terms of financial contributions and change in the structure of our financial institutions so that people in lower and middle income countries who are similarly to the circumpolar region seeing the first and worst impacts of climate change, they're just trying to build health systems. They're aiming for a WHO-aligned access to health for all in the midst of these types of impacts, okay? We need to advocate that our governments change the way things work at the IMF, change the way things work at the World Bank, and actually have reasonable levels of funding. And as we make our own adaptation, we need to take that ecological underpinning into account in everything. This is a paper we wrote on improving health system performances during wildfire season. You have to take, first there are no flames, then there are flames, then the trees look different and everyone's sad. It's like having a different patient who's also very, very key to your survival. So the mitigation sprint is really important, and we have opportunities now that we didn't used to have to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, because pretty much everything now is cheaper to make in a clean energy way. Unfortunately, the incumbents, the fossil fuel companies, are doing everything they can to influence governments to slow this down. But if just left to the market, in fact, we would tip faster. So how can we accelerate that? A social tipping intervention is an action which can accelerate contagious spread of new behaviors, social norms, and structural reorganizations, leading to a qualitatively different social system. So as I was working on this paper, looking at how we can change together, I realized about 2.5 years into writing it, well, a year and a half, that actually I was talking about a social tipping intervention, which led into an entirely different part of the literature. When you look at determinants of emissions pathways in a coupled climate system, it turns out we often model the Earth, but we forget to take the people into account. We have not taken the complex adaptive system that we are all part of into account when we're modeling the Earth itself. And when we do, it matters, because there's all sorts of positive feedback loops that we can use to our own advantage. So what have we got going for us? Well, air pollution itself is responsible for almost 1 out of every 5 global deaths. So the minute we decrease fossil fuel-related air pollution, we save a whole bunch of lives. We in healthcare, we're responsible for about 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than shipping and aviation combined. So think about how much you've heard about flight shaming and stuff. We're just lucky people haven't really come after us yet. And this is the cool part. We allocate 10% of global world product. We have a ton of purchasing power. When you have purchasing power, you have the ability to tip these markets. And so we wrote the paper about this. There's a downloadable PowerPoint that you can use to help. And so we were looking for an example. We needed someone to show us that this was possible. The UK did. So they now have an evidence-aligned plan. NHS England, it goes through the entire country. Every hospital has a net zero plan. It's evidence-based. It was done by the same academics who work on the Lancet Countdown. And they managed to get it written into the Health and Social Care Act at the national level. So this is actually legally binding now. And they're hitting their targets. So this is what a rational person would do, right? If you say, okay, we need to hit net zero, we figure out, okay, what are the buckets of carbon? What do we need them to be? Where can we make our biggest reductions quickly? They have that pathway set. So they showed us that that was possible. So if you go back, these are things like electricity, volatile anesthetics, et cetera. So now we basically have to do a QI project on everything, one of those in the hospital, and use our influence on society at large. And so when you think about it, although this is a collective action problem, we're all one, each one of you is one individual. So where do you start? You pick a thing. Doesn't matter what it is, whatever you get most excited about, whether it's food or plastics, you use a strategic method to pick the most ambitious target you think you can get done with the financial, social, and ecological resources available to you. Social capital matters. Now, we are nerdy, and we think people will care about the data. Many humans do not. So it's really important to come up with a story that moves people's hearts. And that can be often about your patients. We are so effective because we show up and we say, we need to phase out coal-fired power, because I saw this little girl in the emergency department last week. She's been in there every 2 weeks for the last year because there is so much pollution from the coal-fired power plant that is close to where she lives. That type of a strategy has worked around the world, and it matters to show up with your stethoscopes. You're clearly indicating who you are. When you get a win like that, it inspires other similar wins, and it inspires hope, and it goes around like this. So quick wins include moving from a meter dose inhaler to a dry powdered inhalant, getting rid of laughing gas, getting rid of nitrous oxide, as well as desflurane. And, so we're like, okay, the NHS is good, this is great, but it's only the NHS. So what we did at COP26 was we had a clear yes or no answer. We said, will you, country A, like Canada, sign up to the WHO program on sustainable low-carbon health systems? So I was running around, we got the CMA to sign on, we got the Nurses Association, et cetera. All the countries were doing this. We thought we would maybe get about 9 countries to sign on. The US went at the halfway mark. They were an early mover. We already knew the NHS UK was supportive. By the end, by the time the dust settled, 2 weeks later, we had 52 countries. Peer pressure, clear yes or no, obvious, powerful early movers, and a positive vision of the future. This works. There was a Nick Watts, who is the leader in the NHS. He came, his major move was to come and park the zero emissions ambulance in the parking lot. So we had this gorgeous show and tell vehicle, and we'd just walk our minister over there and be like, see, this is what the NHS is doing. Now 83 countries, and at COP28 in the UAE, we showed up to the first ever ministerial. So all of a sudden, all of these countries who had committed two years earlier were telling us what their plan was. So I was at the back when Nepal was telling about their climate adaptation plan. I just started to cry, because I hadn't heard those words out of anyone else's mouth other than about 10 people that I'd spent the last 10 years with. And all of a sudden, all of these ministers, 49 health ministers, were there not only with a commitment, but with an early plan. So we have reached a tipping point when it comes to sustainable healthcare in the world. And now we get the cool part of that feedback cycle, because now our governments have committed and we can hold them to it. And so look at all the things that have happened. We had a Planetary Health Plenary yesterday. So Gail was telling us about how she institutionalized tap water for irrigation by passing a motion. That's super important. Saleh was telling us about his very, very cool climate-informed flood response that they have in the UAE. Lai Hang was telling us about a new heat adaptation plan. Ian, and this is a key thing, he's like, I don't know much about climate change, but I'm a leader, I've got a lot of positional power. What I did was I opened the way for the young people who care about this. So Sandy, a friend of mine, was able to do the green ED. And so if you're a senior leader and you're like, whoa, 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 I don't know what to do, just put up your hand, say, guys, I don't know what to do, tell me what to do. You will have a flood of people who've just been trying to move this along, but who are trying to advocate upwards through the medical hierarchy, who will help you figure this out. We know we're all learning together. No one expects you to be an expert. We're footprinting hospitals around Canada, choosing wisely. This was a meeting of the minds yesterday. Choosing wisely. Apparently 30% of the things we do, we don't need to do. So that saves time, money, and a carbon footprint of whatever it was. 30%, we can get rid of it. And I believe that we need to do that in order to keep the part that we really want, in order to keep our ecological foundation stable. So proud of Canada. Our dean, someone in a position of power, said, hey, I would like to create a different sign-on for our academic health institutions. So over the course of about a year, we went from 0 medical schools in Canada to all of the medical schools in Canada committed to the Declaration on Planetary Health. And so we have managed to start to divest from fossil fuels at the Canadian Medical Association. Healthy energy decreases greenhouse gas emissions. We helped to phase out coal-fired power in Ontario. And then in the national, we contributed to a national accelerated phase-out plan through the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. That let Canada co-found the Powering Past Coal Alliance with the UK, which is now catalyzing this work internationally. I was asked to speak at the international launch. I had a puffer in my pocket, okay? So I could tell the patient stories. That's our job in these scenarios. One of my heroes, Dr. Eric Notebart, he logged all the places in Montreal where cyclists were getting hit because the cycling network was no good. Made an alternative map, showed up at every council meeting, and said, hey, we could do it this way, save time, save money, save lives, and save carbon. So if you've used a bike lane in Montreal while you've been here, you can have Eric to thank, Eric and his team, okay? He's now done that in other cities as well. So my friend, beautiful friend, Dr. Melissa Lim, she has always loved nature. She started a national parks prescription program that's now gone viral internationally, and all of this makes us better right now. So if you decrease outdoor air pollution, you decrease the 5 top chronic diseases that kill Canadians. If you give more green space, you also decrease air pollution as well as decreasing noise pollution and leading to increased feelings of wellness and decreased anxiety. If you get people onto their feet to get around as well as on bikes, you actually decrease mortality, okay? So these are no-brainers. Power is required to get a lot of this done. One of my heroes, again, Dr. Jane Philpott, became Minister of Health. She led an evidence-based process for our last food guide. She said there are not going to be closed-door meetings with the food and beverage industry. What that meant was that when ours came out, it looked the exact same as the Eat Lancet Commission because they were using the same literature base at the same time, okay? And so really, we can make this much better. Imagine if we use the billions of dollars we spend every year on healthcare food to seed a local food economy. That's a good idea because right now a lot of our tomatoes, for instance, are grown in Mexico. Their water table's tanking. Okay, that's not going to get better. We want to bring this food production back to Canada, and we can seed those local food economies with the money we're spending anyway on patients' diets. And who wouldn't rather eat local food? They're already doing this in the Okanagan and central BC. Prescription birth control, very important. Making sure that women have access to the sexual and reproductive health care that they tell us that they want. Decreases maternal mortality, decreases child mortality, decreases morbidity and mortality from natural disasters, because now you have a woman who can read, trying to get 2 children or less children to safety as opposed to a woman who can't read, who's trying to manage a really giant family in the middle of a typhoon. This is life-saving. Switching to clean natural gas as well is important. So there's a ton of things that we can do. And when you think about it, this is why we went into medicine anyway. We know that local toxics impact indigenous peoples more than others. We know we have to go to bat against the fossil fuel industry. They want to keep making the money they're making. We've already done that. My organization, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, helped to organize enough health professionals globally to sign on to the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty that the World Health Organization signed on, and that paved the way from a social license perspective for the European Parliament and the first countries to sign on. So from improving health now to improving health later to improving health and facing up to the most powerful organizations in the world, if we shift our practice, we shift our money, and we shift power enough, we are going to see that we turn a rapid low-carbon transition from something that is possible to something that is inevitable. And the way we do it is by starting with the community that we've got. And so I want to say thank you for inviting me into your community today, and I can't wait to see what we're going to get done together as part of this beautiful, complex, adaptive system that we're all part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Howard. That was a very inspirational talk, and I especially appreciate you speaking about the grief and everything that we go through. Do we have any questions from the audience? We have like a minute or two for 1 or 2 questions. The talk was excellent. I was writing down questions as you were going through, and the following slide you would answer the questions, which is great. But I know you said that grief is kind of a continual process. When you look at your neighbors to the south and you see what's going on and the climate deniers, how often do you feel like you have to revisit your grief and address that?
My worst grief happens during climate impact. So when I'm sitting there in smoke, it's hard for me to come up with a positive outlook. But to be honest, it's so addictive making the change that I'm almost always just figuring out, okay, like, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And so in Canada, we now have a roadmap for the implementation of the Declaration on Planetary Health. And we know that the top 3 things we're going to try to get done is phase out desflurane, make sustainable healthcare secretariats, and then make a national body to help make all of this easier for people on the ground so that the structural supports and the funding is there. And so I'm just sitting here like, okay, I'm going to talk to that person, I'm going to talk to that person, I'm going to talk to that person. And I really think it's important that we're clear that a positive vision of the future, that gives some people something to work for, and that is what we need to counter fascism.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
go away yet, Dr. Howard and Gail, stay please. So I wanted to thank you for reminding us that the climate crisis is not a distant threat, but a present and pressing health emergency. Oh, sorry, we didn't see. Yeah, we have time.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to ask a
Just
question?
one question. Is there any studies about the effect of military conflicts on climate change?
It's very bad. I mean, you can imagine, right? It's
So it's not- yeah.
just a tremendous number of built things that fly, that create destruction. And when I really think about it in terms of the stability of the planetary health nest. And so it's bad for the ecological foundation, it's bad for the social foundation, it's definitely bad for healthcare. And so bad for health now, bad for health into the
So
future.
is this one factor we can mitigate? Because like my information about it is coming from The Guardian, and I think The Guardian just recently published an article saying that the military operation in Gaza, for example, caused an emission equivalent to 33 countries in 1 year. So
It's absolutely.
if we are trying not to print papers, we might as well just try to stop wars. And this didn't come up as one of the things that we want to mitigate.
Absolutely. I think that decreasing emissions related to conflict is definitely one of the goals that we can set in our path towards a healthy future, 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good points, and thank you, Dr. Howard, for answering our question. So I just wanted to thank you for the inspiration and the call to lead with science and with courage. I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Galetta, for moderating.